Hello, I'm Adrian Ingram. Like other guitar players, I like to play the blues. And in this teaching video, what I'd like to do is to show people that already know how to play the blues in the style of the electric blues players like B.B. King, Buddy Guy, Otis Rush, Freddie King, Albert Collins. What I'd like to do is to show ways to make the playing a little bit more jazzy, to add more harmonic colour, and perhaps greater creative possibilities. Blues players who enjoy the playing of people like Robin Ford or Duke Robillard should be able to use these ideas to make their playing more interesting. Before we start, there are some things in the teaching video that I'd like to briefly explain. Firstly, I'm going to be using the Roman numeral system. Some of you may have come across that already, whereby chords are, we use chord 1, chord 4, chord 5. There's nothing difficult or mystical about this, because all we're doing is taking the degrees of the scale, and on each degree of the scale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on up until number 8, we build a chord, and then we call the chord chord 1, chord 2, chord 3, chord 4, chord 5, chord 6, and so on and so forth. In a blues, the main chords that we deal with are chords 1, chord 4, and chord 5. Now in a harmonized scale, chord 1 is usually a major 7th. In a blues, we tend to treat it as a dominant 7th. So in this case, we're using a G. So chord 1 of G would not be G major 7, but G7. Same with chord 4. Normally chord 4 would be a major 7th chord, but in a blues we tend to treat it as a dominant. So in this case it would be C7. And chord 5, which we usually refer to the dominant chord anyway, is what it says it is, a dominant chord. So a chord progression 1, 4, 5 in G will be G7, which is based on 1, C7, which is based on 4, and D7, which is based on 5. Other notes in the harmonized scale are also used. Number 3, which is a minor chord. Number 6, which is a minor chord. The other thing that we will mention also is turnarounds, and that happens bars 11 and 12 of a blues, where you're just finishing the blues, and then you have these. The various kinds of turnarounds. The term turnaround simply means the tune is turning around back to the beginning and starting all over again. So it's important you understand what these things mean before we start. And before we start, let's get in tune. Here's top E. The third string. And the fourth string, D. The fifth string, A. And the low E string. The main difference between a jazz type blues and the Chicago type blues is in the chord progression. So we're going to start with a basic jazz chord progression. Then as we go along we can add things to this and make it more interesting. If you look in the booklet you'll see 5 chords that you need to play. So firstly, finger these chords. Notice that there are some dead strings that we're choking off with the left hand. If you've not played a dominant 7th chord in this way before, it may take some practice to stop those notes from sounding, but the percussive sound that is achieved when playing those adds to the sound of the chord. So we've got a B flat 7, a B flat 9, an E flat 9, a C minor 7, again with that choked off string in between, and an F9, which is the same shape as the E flat 9, 2 frets higher. Notice that on some of these chord shapes we don't actually strike every string. For instance, on the 9th chord with the right hand, I'm only playing up as far as the 2nd string and not sounding the 1st string. That's a very common thing with jazz chords. Just because we have the chord down with the left hand doesn't mean to say we have to strike every note with the right hand. And careful listening tells us that sometimes less is more. You don't have to play every single note. So, to assist me with this basic blues progression, which I'm going to play through twice, is Andy McKenzie playing 7-string guitar. So here we go with the basic blues progression. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now that progression, fairly simple, but it forms the basis to the other things we do, and it's important that you get that really well practiced, memorize it. If you ever do any jam sessions where there's some jazz players playing, the blues is always a safe bet to get up and play, and that's probably the sequence that they will be using, or certainly something very close to it. The next thing we can do is to work on trying to play some solos over that, going from what you already know and what you feel proficient at, and extend it into a blues feel. Firstly, play a little lighter, try to avoid the dotted rhythm, these sort of rhythms. Play a little bit more economically also. No need to be playing necessarily 4 in a bar, particularly if you're playing with someone else. Try to avoid the obvious pentatonics and use chordal notes. So instead of those things ad infinitum, try and put in the occasional chord note, the 3rd of the scale. And the 13th or 6th. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And the 9th. And of course, some blues players that you may be familiar with already use that technique. B.B. King, perhaps that's the thing that separates B.B. King from Buddy Guy and Freddie King and the other players of a similar vein. So, to start with this feel, let's try using the basic progression, basic jazz progression, over a shuffle rhythm, an implied shuffle rhythm, not too heavy, but a shuffle type rhythm, and that's a very good place to start making your playing sound more jazzy. So here we go. With Andy McKenzie, I'm going to play a Duke Ellington tune called Things Ain't What They Used to Be.